My name is Alfredo Deza, and I'm working as a cloud advocate with Microsoft. Today, I want to talk to you about Azure Databricks and reading and writing data with it. This is not an actual presentation, but it's actually the delivery of a workshop. That is, this workshop is intended for you to deliver to an audience. I will walk you through some gotchas and some things that may happen while you try to deliver this workshop for Azure Databricks. And I'll try to show you the best way to deliver these and be successful with your audience. Let's get started. All right. So you should be seeing now my Microsoft Azure, the portal, the Azure portal with Databricks right there. But before we get into that, I'm going to show you the repository and a couple of things that are useful for you to know. So as you know, this is a workshop. We've put together several different workshops. This is the repository, it's Microsoft/workshop-library. And so the idea is that you will get into one of these repositories and you will find the workshop that you want to be giving. And then this repository is a public template. So you can see here that we have a public template there. That means that the files, like it's almost like forking. If you ever forked a repository, it's like you're going to make a copy of this repository. And the difference between forking and using a template is that it's like if you're copying the files, so you don't care about the history or the commits that happened before that, and you'll have full availability to make any changes you want. So in the workshop library, you will navigate. Like I'm going to go all the way to the beginning, so that I can show you how it looks. And there's a very good README that explains everything that you may need to know, all of the workshops that are available. Today, we're going to do the Databricks one. So I'm going to keep scrolling all the way down to data workshops. And you can see here that that's the read and write data using Databricks. So if you click here, it will take you directly to the path that you need to be, which is within, it's a /full/intro to Databricks, and then you get to this README. This README has everything that you need. It will have the goals, the objectives for the audience that you will be presenting to, and it'll tell you exactly what you will need. For this specific workshop, your audience will need, for sure, an Azure account that has credits available to run and operate a Databricks cluster. So that's a must. But you will go through these and you will see like, oh, okay, so there's goals, there's prerequisites, there are things that I need, that my audience will need in order to receive this workshop. And all of these workshops are matched one-to-one with a learning module. In this case, the learning module is right here. It's called Read and Write Data in Azure Databricks. So if you click on that, you will see that it's this one right here. Why is that? Well, this will give you a couple of things. You can use this as a reference. You can use the learning module as a reference for the workshop that you're giving, and it'll give you all of the information that you need to do. You need to know. A useful tip is that for sure, absolutely 100% recommended to just go through the whole module so that you're very aware of not only like the contents, but two other things. You'll be able to emphasize and highlight things that are interesting to you, that you want to convey to your audience. And the other thing is that you might catch a couple of things that might be problematic for you or your audience. And it's like, oh, this is going to be complicated because this part here, might take a while to run or might take extra effort. And so that's why it's important. So first, to really know exactly what you're presenting. The other one, to find those interesting things to you that you want to emphasize to your audience. And the other one is to catch possible problems. So I've gone through it, and I'll try to tell you a little bit of the things that I believe you might get into trouble, but you'll be able to see what's going on. The other thing that I want to show you before we get started, and let me go back here to the repo, is that these workshops already come with slides pre-made for you. You can see here that the slides are here. There's a PowerPoint link. The slides are in the repo, and those slides are for you to use and to make changes as in however way you want them. So if you click on them and you download those, you'll see something like this. These are the actual slides. This is, let me see. So the idea here is that this is kind of like a baseline of slides, and you make some modifications to the slides, and it will give you the ability to edit those and put your name on it. So if it's just you giving the presentation, then you'll update this speaker name, and but everything is already ready for you. Like you have read and write date, like the title, and then here we have 37 slides. There's no prerequisites. You have some learning objectives, the agenda, everything that you're going to cover, everything that you're going to go through. The agenda is kind of like involved, but you see that everything's very like ready for you. And you can add your own flavor of things. You can make your own changes. You can try to make it your own, or just leave it as is. And then it will walk you through all of the things that you will cover, which is basically referencing the learning module that I showed you in the beginning. So that's it. I'm not going to go through all of the slides, but you get kind of like the idea. This is inside the repo, and it's already everything's already there for you. I don't need to go through all of the slides. Again, this is not me necessarily presenting the workshop, but kind of like walking you through how presenting the workshop will look like. So you will use the slides as a reference. You have the learning module, and you have the need for having an actual Azure account. So let's go to the learn module, because I think that's going to be easier to kind of like walk you through everything that you need to do. Here you have the learning objectives as well. It goes through a brief introduction, and it'll tell you exactly what the prerequisites are. In this case, you do need an Azure subscription, like I mentioned, and the most of the time-consuming operations will happen in the next unit, in the read data in CSV format. The title is slightly misleading because it tells you, yeah, we're going to read data in CSV format. However, this goes into setting up an actual working Databricks cluster. Now, that's kind of problematic because you're expecting these to be, I'm just going to read some CSV data, but in fact, you have to, it starts right away out of the gate by telling you that this will need some prerequisites. And the requisites are that, well, you need to deploy an Azure Databricks workspace and create a cluster. Now, this is not that complicated. This is not terribly involved. However, it does have a few steps. So I'll walk you through some of the steps, and then I'll pause once I get to creating the cluster and creating the workspace, because it does take a few minutes so that you can get like a look and feel of how that works. So I'm going to go to the portal. And again, if you follow these to like all of the points here, you'll see that you'll accomplish this no problem. And this session today is recorded as well, so you can reference it later. So I'm going to go to Azure Databricks. You can see here that I've already created one, but let's quickly see how that looks. You select your subscription, you put a new resource group. You can use an existing resource group. If you're familiar with resource groups, that's great. If you're not, that just means I'm grouping together some services, so it makes it easier to manage them. If you want to delete them later, that's the thing. You enter a workspace name. So this is just something that you might want to use here as something that it's meaningful for you. So it could be, workshop demo or Databricks demo or something like that. And then you have the pricing tier. The standard is usually fine. I think that's the basic one, and then a region. And then you do a review and create, and that will take a second. This creation step takes about 2 to 3 minutes, more or less. It might take a little bit more, but certainly no more than 5 minutes, I don't think. So I'm going to try to close these. Doesn't let me. Well, I'm going to click here. This is one that I've already created. And once you create it's called the workspace. Once you create the workspace, then you can launch it. When you launch it, you're going to take advantage of the Azure integration with Databricks. Databricks, you can have your own servers and deploy Databricks and install Databricks, but by using Azure, you're taking advantage of like not having to deal with that, because it can be really complicated. And in here, you're just going to launch it, and you're going to have the ability to create a cluster and an environment. So I'm going to click launch. It's going to ask me what account. I want this one. And you can see here is signing in to Databricks. So I'm going to make these slightly bigger. So this right here is excellent, because you don't have to set up anything. It just takes a couple minutes, and then you're thrown into Databricks. The next thing that you have to do in order for this to work is to create a cluster. So, and again, all of this is explained in the Learn modules. If I go back here very quickly, you will see like we've done the we didn't do an ARM template, but we provided a subscription, a resource group, the location. We went through the pricing tier. In this case, it's asking you to select the premium one. I don't think that's absolutely 100% necessary, but we'll see what happens right now, because I didn't select premium. And then you start creating the cluster. So we'll see how creating the cluster looks like. In this case, it has some specifics, and there's some options here that are interesting. I'll go more than, I think this portion is more useful for you to be aware of, because there's a lot of different checkboxes and different options and different versions that you can use that might affect how your audience is going to interact with your workshop. So if you start making mistakes around here, then your audience might be like, oof, like this thing is not running correctly, or I'm getting errors that I didn't know that I was going to get. So let's go ahead and create a new cluster, and let's just follow those steps. So in Databricks, you'll go here to the compute section. You can see here that I have a demo cluster already. It was using the runtime 10.0. The Learn module is actually telling or instructing you to use a specific PySpark version, runtime version, which is 7.2, I believe. So let's just try to follow that. I'm going to create a cluster, and then we're going to say workshop demo. I'm going to create my cluster workshop demo. Cluster mode, I believe it's standard. You can have, or actually, I think it's single node. So again, pay attention to the details, because as you're delivering these, you'll want to make sure that these details are right. So let's quickly go back to what we need to do. Yes, so it's single node and runtime is 7.3. So let's go back to Databricks and select single node. So what does this mean is that Databricks, the beauty of Databricks is that it allows you to distribute the compute necessities of running a Jupyter notebook. So say, for example, you're running a Jupyter notebook and you have like a ginormous amount of data, like let's say 1 terabyte of data that you want to operate on. Well, you can't really operate on a 1 terabyte CSV file on your laptop. You'll run out of memory, you'll get into trouble. And what Databricks does is like it splits everything into chunks, and spreads it around the cluster. So that allows you to take advantage of that. But by using a cluster mode as a single node, it means like, well, you'll just use this one single compute instance. So sort of like cheating because it's not really a cluster, but it's cost effective, and it'll allow you to kind of like get a look and feel of how this operates, but in a pretty straightforward way and without being super expensive, because a cluster can, you'll see here with a few of the options what that looks like. All right, so runtime version, it wants 7.3 according to the Learn module. I don't need this promotional discount. And the autopilot options, that's really interesting because it allows you to kind of like hit the brakes on your spending amount. So if your audience is concerned about leaving resources up and running and being charged for something that is not being used, then this autopilot option is pretty useful. That means that if you're not using your cluster, the cluster will automatically terminate. So the learning module says, I think it's 45 minutes. And I think the minimum that you can do here is 10 minutes. Yeah, see, 10 minutes. So you can't do anything less than 10 minutes. So let's just follow the directions from the learn module. It's 45 minutes. So that's pretty useful. And then I think this node type is fine. You can see it will take 75 cents for running in an hour. I think that's that's certainly not a problem. And this workshop shouldn't be more than 1 hour. Perhaps maybe a little bit more if creating a cluster takes a little longer. So we'll see if that's the right node. It's TS3 V2, the recommended one. You can see here, yeah, that's right. And then we'll hit create cluster, and then we'll wait for a second and see how long it takes. So I'm gonna go back to Databricks. That looks okay. There's nothing needed in advanced options. You can definitely poke around and see if there's anything there. And then that's it. So I'm gonna create a cluster, and these will take a few minutes. So while this is creating, let's go back to the Learn module and see what are the next steps. So the next steps is once you have your cluster up and running, and actually this might be a good thing for you to do, is that we can actually start doing some of these things, importing notebooks into Databricks before the cluster is up and running, because one thing is a cluster, and the other thing is the Databricks service. So the Databricks service is like you have your dashboard, you have different things that you can do. You can import data sets, you can install certain things, but you may have more than one cluster. You can see that I already had one that was kind of turned off. You can make selections, and you can go back and forth, and it's like, oh, I want to use that cluster, I want to use this cluster. So while one is creating, you can certainly do these. So this is a potential good trick. While the cluster is getting created, you can still do some of these things. So let's just leave that running, and come here and do an import. So what we're going to do is we're going to import some notebooks. So these are ready to go, ready to use notebooks that you can use right away when the cluster is up and running. So I'm going to click copy, and there's this long URL here. You can see that's reading and writing data in Azure Databricks. So we're going to do an import on my account. So if I go back to here, you can see that this is Databricks. This spinning wheel means that this is still trying to create. And we're going to take advantage of going to the workspace. I'm going to go here, workspace, click there, click on the little home here, and right on my user, I'm going to click the down arrow. I'm going to say import. And then on import, you can say it's import notebooks. I'm going to say URL. So it certainly has support for uploading a file, but in this case, we want to use what the Learn module suggests. So it's the URL, and then I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to click import, and it will do the import. Once that's import, you can see it's right here, reading and writing. I'll have all of these things available for me. So I think the Learn module wants to start with the first one. So it will load. I don't know if that was pretty easy to follow. So let's try to do that because I'm clicking around and I don't want you to feel confused. So you go, and this is all explained in the Learn module as well. So you'll go to Databricks Workspace. Once it's important, it will show up in your username. So again, if I click home, all of your users are here. That's my username, and I click that. Click here. Find the reading and writing data notebook that I just imported. These are all my files. So I click that. All of these will get open, and you'll select the first one. So once you select the first one, this loads, and it's a Jupyter notebook running on Databricks. However, very important detail: you don't have a cluster attached. Again, what we were creating the cluster, right? The cluster had the spinning wheel that's running in the background. You're working with Databricks already. You have your files. You're importing a notebook. You're doing other stuff, and you can take advantage of this extra time so that you can explain some of the ins and outs of Databricks and the stuff that you're doing. We can actually check if the compute. I'm gonna open it in a new tab. It took me all the way there, but it's already running. So workshop demo, it's already running. So I guess that took like about 3-4 minutes, give or take. You can see there's just one node. What that means is that now we can attach it. That means like our notebook will use that cluster as the backend for our jobs. So this means that we now need to do the exercise again of going back to the workspace, finding the notebook and clicking on the first one, which is reading data and reading data CSV notebook. Clicking on that. So this loads. If I try to run this without a cluster, what do you think will happen? So let's try to run these and see what happens. So what happens is that, well, nothing happens. So if you're running a workshop and your audience is trying to operate on these, you will get into some of these troubles that you know, when you don't have a.
This is her. Kaya nga.
So what we're going to be doing right now is we're going to attach these clusters. So I'm going to click here on the attached thing at the top, and you will see here it's like, you know, it's giving me options. So I'm not using demo cluster. I'm using the workshop demo, which is what we created. So I'm going to click that, and now I have this green arrow. It seems like everything's everything's fine, and I'm going to click run cell. And now it's actually doing stuff. It's running the command. So this is basically trying to set up your environment so that it will it's mounting data sets. It's doing all kinds of operations that you don't need to do anything. Everything's just ready for you to just click through. But I'm mentioning these gotchas, these issues that you may face, you may run into when you're running your workshop. So you can see here it's like doing a lot of things. Everything's done, and now I think the usefulness of this is just walking through the first notebook. But there's actually no need for me to go through every single portion of it. You'll get an idea of how this looks and feels. It will tell you a little bit about the endpoints, and then that's fine. Then it talks about the Spark session. That's all good. It talks a little bit about the Spark API. You know, newer versions of Databricks will allow you to use pandas, which is really interesting. Here you have like the Spark API and how does Spark API look. Why Spark? Because behind the scenes everything's using Spark. So that's why. So you have the Spark session, and well, you have a lot of content here, but you can see that the Learn module, if we go back here, because you might get this question, if the Learn module, the title of this was Read Data in CSV format. And so far we spent like almost like 20 minutes creating the workspace in Azure, launching the Databricks service, creating the cluster, importing the notebook, and then going through a lot of the specifics of PySpark and the Spark API and the context and importing some data sets that the notebook is doing. And so far, we haven't really read anything in Databricks. Well, it takes a second. And this is why I chose this first module, so you can get like an idea of how that will look like. All right, so let's go back to Databricks, and finally we're reading from CSV with inferred schema. So that's really neat because it's trying to. I'm gonna execute this one. It tells you that, hey, like this thing has some data sets already ready for you to operate on, and it's going to tell you that it can run, so you can see a little bit of the contents. This is a TSV file. The TSV is a tab separated value. I'm used to more like seeing comma separated values files, but this is a tab separated value. So the delimiter is a tab. So it explains a few things about the type of file and the contents. It has a header. The file is tab separated. It has two columns. The first two columns are strings, and the third is a number. That's fine. And then you're going to start reading these, and we're going to be using. This is using Spark. So we're going to run these. It reads the CSV file. And this is interesting right here. I don't know if you see that. You can. It's the like it does the job. Spark behind the scenes is like I told you. Remember that the thing with Databricks is a cluster. It can be a cluster. It can be several different machines working together and splitting up the work in chunks. So in this case, we have a single node, and this is just a single job. So it loads that, and so again, what you're going to be doing is going through all of the cells here and try to look at the contents of the file that you're working with, and seeing the specifics of what that looks like. Here we're just displaying a little bit on how that looks, and then we're this specific portion of it, we're going to infer the schema. So you know that the text mentioned that we're dealing with a little bit of strings and numbers, and we want Databricks to figure out what the schema is. So inferring the schema is an option. You can see here in line number 4. These are specifics that you can certainly explain to your audience and mention why that might be important. Well, not every single. Actually, most data sets that I work with don't really give you any schemas at all, and you have like a blob of text that you have to figure out. So that's why this is useful. So it starts using it understands that something's a timestamp, that another thing might be a string, and that requests are integer. But it also has support for reading a CSV with defined schema, and you can for sure try to do that. And here it's using this actually looks like Python, and then you can say, hey, the CSV schema is, you have timestamp, and that's a string type, an integer type, and that will work. So I'm not gonna execute any more cells, but just go all the way to the bottom, And you can see here that once you get to the bottom, which I think is very useful, it gives you the next step. Start the next lesson reading data in JSON. So if I go back to the Learn module, so let's just assume for a second that we went through all of the cells, and yes, we've already created the required resources. We created a cluster. We went through these options. We imported a notebook into Databricks. And completed the reading data CSV notebook. Now, in the Learn module, when you click Continue, you will see that there's a read data in JSON format. It doesn't have much content other than, hey, just follow the follow the next notebook in the notebooks that you were presented. So if I go back to Databricks, your audience might be getting to this point and say, the next step is reading data in JSON, and that's the next unit. And again, a different notebook loads up. If you notice, there's something that is not okay in this notebook, and that is that, once again, our cluster is not attached to our notebook. That is because, you have the ability to attach different types of notebooks, and here you can select exactly what we were using before, and then that's fine. But if your audience is not selecting these, again, when it loads new notebooks, they might get into trouble and say, hey, nothing works, I don't know what's going on. You need to be aware of that. And with JSON files, it's very similar to CSV files. You go through the different operations to try to set up your environment, to have different examples working with JSON files. It does it without a schema and then with a user-defined schema. So very similar. Here, read the JSON file. Again, I'm not going to go through the specifics. You can define your own schema. You can see here that it's getting very well defined with a rather involved JSON schema, and read the data in JSON, and then all the way to the end. And at the end, what it does, start the next lesson reading data in Parquet format, which I think is really neat. I really like the Parquet format, which is a set. Like, if you never worked with Parquet formats, it's an open source schema definition, not schema definition, it's a data definition for a type of data, and it has several files and several things within a directory, within a compressed directory. That's a Parquet, and usually Parquet files have the schema attached to it. It's actually uncommon to see something that doesn't, like a Parquet file that doesn't have a schema attached to it. So that's really interesting. And let me go back to the Learn module once again, and you'll see next unit read. So the Learn module is following one-to-one the content from the notebooks in Databricks. So there's no way that anyone can feel lost, and you'll go through the Parquet format and then read data stored in tables and views. So you'll go through that. It's another notebook that you'll need to attach to cluster. And then you'll write data, which I think is really interesting. So you'll write to a Parquet data, a Parquet file, and I think this one was the interesting one. Writing to a Parquet file, but reading and writing data was especially resonated with me, because then it tells you how to read like in other formats like CSV and JSON, and transform that to Parquet and save it as Parquet files. And then finally you get to a knowledge check. The knowledge check, I think for a well, you only have two questions. If you're not familiar with a knowledge check, it's a way in learning modules that tell you, it's like, they ask you, it's like, hey, do you let's check that the content that was provided to you, that you kind of like have a good grasp of what's going on. In a workshop scenario, it's totally up to you how to handle it. What I try to do is kind of like ask the audience about these questions in an informal way, not necessarily kind of like a test or trying to evaluate their knowledge. Behind the scenes, yeah, sure. Like the motive behind that is for you to figure out what you're trying to. I mean, figure out if the audience is actually catching what they're what they're learning, what you're offering. So you can say, hey, so far, can you tell me how do you list files in DBFS within a notebook? And do you think we would use ls or %fs or %fsls? And your audience might reply with that. And then that's it. Like, I want to show you. I'm gonna go back. Not reading. Let's actually go into the workspace and select the writing data. I think this is the one that I wanted to show you, where it loads. This is saving it as a Parquet file. Yeah, this is the one. So writing data. This is really interesting, I think, because it reads from CSV. Well, in this case, it's a TSV, a tab separated value. You can see here in line 9, and then I don't know why it calls it a CSV DF here. I think this is kind of misleading, but see, this is a good problem because I'm catching these things like, well, why is this called a CSV file if it's really a TSV, a tab separated value? So I guess that's very common in programming, where someone might be assigning variables that are lying to us. That's not a CSV file. Okay, so it goes down to this cell and it tries to set a little bit of the options that you need to in order to save that TSV file as a Parquet file. So I think that's a really interesting one. Hey, I'm dealing with different types of data formats, JSON, CSV, TSV, and I want to save it as a Parquet file. And the option is basically it's saying, hey, write this as a Parquet file. So I think it's really useful. And then that's it. I think once you finish those steps, as the Learn module shows you here, you get to the very end, and then you get to the summary. And right here you can go over the things that we talked about: reading CSV files into a Spark data frame, reading JSON, TSV files, the tab separated value ones. Then write. But we didn't go through the tables and views, but you would in the case that you were presenting this workshop. And then you would write data from a Spark data frame into a Parquet file, which I think is pretty useful. Then at the end, don't forget to delete the Azure Databricks instance and delete the resource group. This is why the resource group is the option number 3 here, or the step number 3. That's why it's useful, because then you're not incurring in extra costs. Then everything will just get wiped away. This is very useful, especially for your audience that might not want to spend extra dollars if they're not using any of these things once the workshop completes. So this is also very useful to go through. And again, everything is in the slides. If we go to the slides, it will cover exactly the same content as the Learn module, because it's a mapping one-to-one, but it gives you the flexibility to adapt and change and add or remove whatever you want. And again, the workshop library repo has everything you need. This recording, this presentation from today will be in the workshop library. So if anything that you missed, or I was going too fast, or I didn't explain correctly, well, you can go back and check that video that will go there. And this will give you the repository. The README has a lot of very good information there for you so that you can have a good idea. You can see here I added a couple of screenshots of exactly what you need to do. And then that's it. That's how you would present a workshop about Databricks, and with all of these issues that you may or may not find with your audience.